us this morning as he had to attend cabinet. And before we begin, I just want to recognize some of our very important team members for these conferences, our sign language interpreters. Today is International Day of Sign Languages, and we applaud you. We go straight into the clinical update from Dr. Parasram.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Ms. Alcantara. Welcome to Dr. Fraser and Dr. Hines, members of the media, members of the viewing and listening public. The clinical status update for Wednesday, 23rd September 2020 is as follows. The total number of tests submitted to the public sector, 29,707. Total number of unique patient tests completed, 26,644. Total number of repeated tests, 3,063. Private sector tests have now gone up to 10,832, giving us a total number of samples submitted, both public and private, 37,476. The total number of positives now stand at 4,046, and the number of active cases at 2,019. The number of deaths overnight and condolences to the family have gone up by 2 to 67. And the number of discharges have gone up as well to 873 at the public health facilities, and recovered from the community now stand at 1,087. Within our hospital system, in terms of positive patients, we now have at the Covert Hospital and Multi-Training Center, we have 61 persons, 4 persons in ICU, 7 in HDU. At the Cora Hospital, 22 individuals, all ambulatory. At the Arima facility, 4 persons, and at Augustus Long, there's 1 individual. Within our step-down facilities, we have persons at the Debe Academy, Debe Halls, which is the University of the West Indies campus. There are 6 persons there. And at the UE Canada Hall, there are 52 individuals, as well as Freedom Hall, 45 persons. In terms of our quarantine sites, we have at the Cascadia Hotel 18, Chancellor Hotel we also have 18 individuals, Home of Football, which is state quarantine, 25, and at the Regent Star we have 20 persons. In terms of, I'll be going a little bit into the active distribution and the way we have been monitoring and evaluating the cases out in the community. So those persons that are well enough to be at home, COVID positive, and are now in the community and being monitored by the CMOH offices. So I will begin the discussion, and then Dr. Fraser will take over in terms of some standard operating procedures that he will take from the county level, as well as some objective clinical criteria and measures that we use to escalate patients to the hospital setting. So if I could have my first slide. So the first slide, so it will be 5 pie charts in all. The first one gives you the active cases county distribution. So it was a couple days old, so the numbers are dated by about 2 days. So if we look at the percentages, we see the blue color represents County Victoria, and that county is responsible for housing 30.1% of all the cases that are in home isolation at this time. Following County Victoria, we have all the other counties, and I'll go through them one at a time. St. George Central, which is in yellow, 15.5%. St. Andrew, St. David, 11.2%, 129. St. George West, 10.1%. St. George East, which is Dr. Fraser's county, 93 active cases at this time, which gives us 88.1%. St. Patrick, 104 cases at 9%. County Caroni, 12.5%, and then the River Mayara, which has the smallest burden at this time, 41 persons with active disease, 3.6%. If we could go into my second pie chart. So the second pie chart shows the, instead of quarantine, it should be home isolation patients, clinical disposition. So we break them into different categories based on their symptoms, based on discharges, whether they have been hospitalized. So if you look at this is for County Caroni, we have used as just an example. Asymptomatic persons at this time in County Caroni are 52.8%. So meaning that they would have had symptoms, they would have been positive, and now they have no symptoms at all. So more than half the patients in County Caroni at this time at home have no symptoms. 17.5%, which are 37 for County Caroni, have symptoms. There have been 7.5% which have been recommended for hospitalization because of escalation of their symptoms. Discharges from that particular county were 9%, 19 at this time. Then this will give you a point source, a point in time in terms of discharges. And new cases would have been 13.2. I think this was 2 days old. We could go to the third slide. Third slide is a repeat. Okay, so third slide gives you the home isolation patient disposition. That's the same slide I think we have again. We could go to the fourth slide then. Yeah, percentage comorbidities for home quarantine, home isolated patients in Caroni. So we have persons without comorbidity standing at 83.9%, 167 of their cohort, and persons with comorbidities at 16.1%. So we see 16% of the entire group in Caroni comorbidities and 83.9% having no comorbidities. And my final slide, if we could break down the comorbidities. So this is a breakdown of the 16.1% in Caroni. So those with comorbidities, just to give a little snapshot of what are the types of comorbidities we are seeing in the COVID-19 patients. And we start with our biggest group, which is diabetes, 32.4% of those in Caroni. Hypertension, 27%. There's asthma thereafter, which is 18.9%. Pulmonary issues, other pulmonary diseases, for example, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, we saw those are at 8.1%. Pregnancy-related issues, 5.4%. Obesity 5.4%. Renal cases with issues with their renal system, 2.7%. I think, Candice, at this time, I'd like to hand over to you, so you can take it over to Dr. Fraser.
Thank you very much, CMO. It is a pleasure to welcome a new colleague to the program. Dr. Fraser will continue in the series of presentations from County Medical Officers of Health who give their perspective on the COVID-19 response. Dr. Fraser?
Good morning. Thank you, Ms. Alcantara. I'd like to acknowledge the CMO and my colleague, Dr. Avery Hines, members of the media, viewing and listening public. This morning I do want to talk a little bit about the home monitoring process and to take everyone through what happens from the time we get a positive result until that person is discharged. And then I'd like to demonstrate the use of the pulse oximeter, which is one of the tools that we give to patients to help in the home monitoring process. Once someone has been identified as positive and that result comes to the CMOH office, our team will get in contact with that individual to do the initial informing of the result and then the contact tracing. That entire process could take 20 minutes on average. Sometimes it can take more depending on who you're talking to and what is required. But that initial conversation is to let the individual know that this is the result that you have got, and then to try and find out from that individual who are the contacts that they have come into contact with in the last period of time during the time they were infectious. Once that is done and we have that information, we will then create a list of contacts so we can follow those persons, get in contact with them, let them know that they have been exposed to a positive case, and then to follow them up for the quarantine period that is recommended for them. All the positive cases are then contacted twice daily by the team. They do that in the morning, and then they do that again in the evening time. And that initial, that contact, that follow-up contact is designed to give the medical team an idea of how well the clients are doing. So we have a very extensive checklist of symptoms that we go through. We ask them questions like, do you have any shortness of breath? Do you have any difficulty breathing? Any fever? And it's quite an extensive list. And the list is to cover all of the major symptoms that someone can experience if you have acquired COVID-19 infection. Clients who are considered honesty and trust between both parties. And we try to do that consistently for the entire period. Clients who, for some reason, get ill between calls, those clients are actually encouraged to call the number that has been making contact with them. And if for some reason they can't get into that number, there is still the opportunity to call the ambulance service, which is 811, so that there is never a time where they do not have someone to contact. So between your morning call and your evening call, if for some reason clients get ill, they can call the numbers that have been calling them, the doctors or the nurses who have been calling them consistently. And if for some reason you can't get them, you can also call 811. And that process has been working very, very well. I do want to take some time now just to demonstrate and to talk a little bit about the pulse oximeter. And on the first, I'm just going to show you 3 slides. On that first slide, it describes what a pulse oximeter is. This is the pulse oximeter, and I'm going to show you from the side. And a demonstration of how it works is the finger goes into the pulse oximeter, and once it does, the button can be pressed here, and it's difficult to see, I'm sure, but some numbers will start to come up on the pulse oximeter, because the pulse oximeter will measure not just your oxygen saturation, but it will also measure your pulse. And you can see both of those readings on the machine when it's up. As a tip for measuring your pulse and your oxygen saturation, we recommend using your index finger, but really you can use any finger, but preferably your index finger. If for some reason you can't do that, middle finger or ring finger, it's just because the other fingers tend to have a little more errors in reading, but your index finger is the preferred finger, but middle and ring can also work. If you're going to measure your pulse and your oxygen saturation, it is recommended that you remove all false nails or nail polish, because that can mess with the way in which the machine works. And generally, it's advisable to clean the particular finger that's going to be used for the reading at the time. When do we actually test? We recommend testing twice a day. Or if for some reason you discover you're having difficulty breathing or shortness of breath and you're not feeling as well, you can go ahead and do your pulse oximeter reading. The second slide actually shows, gives us an idea of what those readings look like. Well, let's go to the other slide, because the other slide actually shows the readings so that everyone can get a sense of what is normal. Slide number 2. Yes, there we go. So if normal reading one would expect to get if you're using the pulse oximeter is an oxygen saturation of 95% and above. So that's normal. You put your finger in, wait a few seconds, the reading comes up 95% and above. That's what we're looking for. And your pulse rate generally for normal adults tend to be between 60 beats per minute and 100. So if your pulse rate is between 60 and 100, generally that is considered normal, and that's good. However, if you find your oxygen saturation is dipping 94% and below consistently, that is definitely a bit of cause for concern. And if your pulse is consistently higher than 100, that's also considered abnormal. I do have a slide that talks about what do you do if you find you have abnormal readings. And generally, if you have an abnormal reading when you check your pulse, just make contact with the medical team that has been in contact with you all the time. Again, if for some reason you can't get in contact with the team, call 811, let them know how you are feeling, and also give them the results of the reading that you have just got. So the pulse oximeter, just to recap, is a painless device. No side effects from using the pulse oximeter. It is very, very helpful because it tells you your oxygen saturation, which if it's normal should be 95% and above. And it also tells you your pulse, which when normal usually is between 60 beats per minute and 100. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fraser. And Dr. Hines has prepared an updated epidemiological report and will present at this time. Over to you, Dr. Hines.
Thank you, Ms. Alcantara. Good morning to the CMO, to my colleague Dr. Fraser, to the members of the media and the viewing and listening public. At this time, I would like to present the updated slides on the epidemiologic situation, and then I'll take some time to go into one of those slides in particular in a little more detail. Can we have the first slide, please? So the first, well, that's the intro slide. Let's go to the next, sorry. The first thing we want to do is look again at that epidemic curve showing samples by date of collection. And as we move to the next slide, we can see that the pattern that we have been seeing over the past couple of months has basically been maintained. We are now looking at a fairly consistent pattern of slow decrease in numbers of new cases turning up on a given day to be swabbed and testing positive, as seen by the downward trend in that dark blue section of the graph corresponding to the month of September. I will ask the operators to flag, i.e. remember this slide, because I want to come back to it at the end. Let's move to the next. The demographics, age and sex distribution. We still see, yes, continue. We still see the preponderance of males versus females among the COVID-19 positive patients, and we still see the same general distribution in terms of age groups, with the 25 to 49 age group still consists of, or still comprises nearly 3/5, about 57% of the total cases diagnosed to date. We have smaller numbers, smaller proportions in the older and the younger age bands, and this has been a consistent feature, a consistent pattern throughout the second phase, the propagated phase of the epidemic. Moving to the next slide, we look at the age and sex distribution among those patients who have passed on. And we see that that age distribution is a little different. We see older individuals, and we see a greater preponderance of male versus female patients. In the group of deaths, men outnumbered women by a ratio of 4-to-1. So 80% of the deaths were male and 20% were female. And the main age groups were again above 60, but we have seen several individuals in the younger age group also have unfortunate outcomes, also have fatal outcomes. So it is not that death as an outcome is not possible or not a risk as a younger individual. And again, one of the things that we do emphasize is that people who have pre-existing comorbidities, meaning they previously had diabetes, hypertension, renal failure, other conditions that could weaken your body's ability to fight off a virus, those individuals were again a little more likely to have fatal outcomes. Moving to the next group of slides, we now look at the geographic distribution. The first of the slides shows us basically where we are at this point with distribution among communities. And we do see a growing trend towards more of the new cases showing up on the eastern side of the graph, on the side that was previously noted to be empty. And we do want to encourage everyone across the country to maintain those recommended behaviors to reduce the risk of transmission. Breaking this slide down into a little more geographic detail, if we look just not at communities, but at a given square kilometerage or square mileage, we see the distribution of cases in that eastern part of the country has also has increased and has widened. We see the continuing distribution across population hubs, population centers. So the east-west corridor, the towns of Orima, Sangre Grande, the city of San Fernando, all of those places where there's high population density. But we're now also seeing distributions of more cases along some of those rural areas, rural roads that we weren't seeing before. So we do want to emphasize that all the measures we've been asking people to continue to take continue to be relevant and necessary, and we should be all taking them regardless of where we live in Trinidad and Tobago. Now I'd like us to go back to that epi slide. That's the graph. One of the things that we need to understand about epidemics, especially epidemics of respiratory illness, is that the shape of the curve gives us certain kinds of information. The first bit of the curve, the light blue and the purple, show us the sort of propagated transmission that is associated with continuous exposure of susceptible individuals to infectious ones. So where people have the illness and are continuing to move around and gather in large numbers and gather close together and not observe the requisite physical distancing, mask wearing, etc., you have that sort of propagated pattern of steady increase. And once that movement had begun to subside, we see that that purple bit of the graph actually started to drop off. It started to go down. And in the midst of this downward slope, we noted that there was an anomalous peak at the September 2nd date. Now, this anomalous peak seems to be the source of some contention. Let's explain the detective work behind identifying the potential source of the peak. What we see with these graphs, with this graph in particular, is that the trend demonstrated by the graph represents activities that would have happened approximately 2 weeks prior. And the 2 weeks is not for the reason that you think. It's not the incubation period alone that we've been describing, but it's actually a composition of two things. Number one, the average, not the maximal, the average incubation period of the COVID-19 virus is approximately 5 to 7 days, so about a week. But then persons in our population tend to take about another week before they show up for care and seek testing. So that peak would have corresponded to something that happened about 2 weeks before that. And at that point in time, there seems to have been some sort of large-scale point source exposure of susceptible to infected individuals. If you look at the activities that were taking place around that time, that was around that weekend of the 15th and 16th of August. And this is how we relate that peak to the activities that may have been taking place at that point in time. With that explanation, I'm going to turn you back over to Ms. Alcantara to take the rest of the conference forward.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hines. And we move now to our question and answer segment. Media representatives, 2 questions, please. State your name and the name of the media house that you represent. We start today with Newsday. And so I'm wondering if I see Shane Superville. Mr. Superville, are you ready? Are you hearing us? Okay, I'm seeing that Mr. Superville is trying. Oh, here we go. Good morning, Mr. Superville.
I just have a question for the demo, Dr. Pasharama. It has to do with the development of learning health effects after recovery. I just want to know, among the cases, have people been noted from the virus, have any learning health effects been noticed?
Mr. Superville, sorry, I think we have a little issue with the connectivity with you. So what we're going to do, we're going to move to 98.1, and we'll come back to you, see if we have better connection, okay? Our apologies. So we move now to 98.1 as we address the technical issues with Newsday. Yes, 98.1 please.
Yes, very good morning to you, Ms. Alcantara.
Good morning, Mr. Cummings.
Yes, I'm hearing you quite well. So at least the connection is fairly good on my part. I have 2 questions, one for Dr. Fraser and the other for Dr. Parsuram, and I'll start with Dr. Fraser. Dr. Fraser, we know that there have been some tightening up of the home quarantine protocols, with the persons having to sign quarantine order forms to ensure they stay within the precincts and confines of their homes. In furtherance of that, could the idea of the utilization, I don't know if probably this might be a policy position, could the idea of the utilization of tracking bracelets be another way that could lead for more efficient monitoring of people, especially against what continues to be the growing number of positive COVID-19 cases? Do you see such a concept worthy of pursuing, again, in the interest of public safety? And Dr. Parasaram, I don't know if you may have probably been preview to my next question, but you made reference to some of the things I wanted to ask. But so far, in large measure, we've been hearing that the number of deaths from COVID-19 have been associated with persons with co-mobilities, which is really a state of having multiple medical conditions at the same time. I saw your presentation, and have we been seriously tracking, or do we have any statistics or data that could tell us the number of persons in the country, not just by county, who may be so categorized as having comorbidities? There's a view that this can also help in a more targeted approach towards treatment for the disease. Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of the comorbidities question, yes, we do. So what I did is I presented one particular county just to give the population an idea of what is happening in terms of comorbidities, in terms of number of cases, and I would have chosen one of the counties that had somewhat of the number of cases were significant enough to give us a good idea of a reflection of what is happening in the rest of the country. So we do have that statistic. We now have a Google document that is shared by the county medical officers of health on a real-time basis that is collated through a small telemedicine unit that was set up in my office at the beginning of September, and therefore we'd be able to generate those graphs and charts for all the other counties in Trinidad and Tobago. So that data is available to us and can be shared with the press at a later time as well for the additional counties. But that was just County Caroni in terms of how we wanted to show one county, how it looks for the entire country. But the data is available to us. Dr. Fraser, you want a second question?
Sure. Thank you for your question. I do agree with you, sir, that is indeed a policy decision. And so that is something that has not yet come to fore as something that we're going to be using in the community at this time. We continue to make use of our constant telemedicine, and of course we have lots of support from the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service for persons who we are having difficulty contacting, and also those who we have got wind of may have broken the quarantine. The police service has been very instrumental in helping in that regard.
Okay, wonderful. And we're going back now to Newsday, and hopefully we'll have a better connection this time. Mr. Superville, we're ready for you, please.
Can you all hear me?
We hear you, yes. If you speak slowly, I think we'll get your entire question. It's still a little difficult, but go ahead. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Superville. Okay, I think we still have the same issue. We'll try again. We'll go now to Guardian Media Limited. We're getting ready for Mr. Richard Khan from CNC3. We're going straight to Mr. Khan at this time. I think he's ready.
All right, morning, everyone. You're hearing me?
Yes, good morning.
Yes, good morning.
Okay, good morning. Okay, so my two questions. First, CMO. Now, I've noticed over the past few days, we've had very little number of cases being reported. So I just wanted to know, why is that? Is this a sign of things working? And is the reporting mechanism within the ministry working up to standard? And my second question is to Dr. Avery Hines. Now, I know we're looking at that second peak, and on Monday, the minister kind of dismissed any claims that the elections would have had any contribution to the spread of COVID-19 locally. But we're ignoring that large peak at the beginning, which is about 2 weeks away from the general election. So I just want to update from you, in your professional opinion, as well as from what you've been doing through contact tracing. Has the election contributed to some of our spread locally?
Okay. All right. So in terms of your first question, Richard, so I think Minister would have indicated on Saturday that we were able to clear most of our backlog, And what you're seeing reflected now is more or less what is happening over the last 24 to 48 hours. So the reporting is much better. The way the graphs are being generated are based on real time. So what you're seeing reporting in our press releases daily is more realistic as to what is happening over the last 24 to 48 hours. And we are seeing, as you noted, a decrease in the number of cases over, I would say, the last 5 days. So what you saw before, you would have seen sometimes on one single day we would have been reporting prior to that, maybe 100 cases. But those 100 would have been spread over a period of 5 or 6 or 7 days when we put the reporting period. So now we're seeing, as I said, much more a contracted time period for reporting, 2 days usually, 2 to 3 days. And that is realistic in terms of almost real time as to how we're getting the swabs taken and how we are reporting the positives. So it's getting more real time, and we're actually seeing that decrease over the last few days. So you are correct in making that statement. So over to Dr. Hines.
Right, move to Dr. Hines now, please, for the second question.
Okay, thank you for your question, Mr. Khan. I think it's inaccurate to say that we are ignoring the first part of the graph. At each point in time that we have described this graph, we have described and alluded to the steady upward incline, and we have on numerous occasions also spoken about the fact that movements and gatherings that exceeded and did not comply with the recommendations for reduced numbers, all of those behaviors would contribute to the onward propagation and transmission of the virus, which is demonstrated in that first part of the graph, the part that I described as being the purple part, the part that I described as having an upward trend. Whatever the source of, whatever the cause of the movements and gatherings, the issue is that once people move and once people gather, then we're going to have opportunities for transmission. We've alluded to that. Right at I think on the press conference on the 13th, we projected that we would see an increase, a rapid increase, in the number of cases because of the behaviors prior to that. So saying that we have not spoken about or have not addressed that particular part of the graph, I don't believe to be accurate. Back to Ms. Alcantara.
Thank you. And now TV6, please. We're ready for your questions.
Hello, good morning. Elizabeth Williams, TV6 News. Good morning to the panel.
Good morning.
I don't know if you are aware, I just want some guidance with respect to my first question. We have been told that a number of children are at this time at the Army camp in Tobago. I know at one particular point in time, a member of the Defense Force would have tested positive for COVID-19. And that person would have left Tobago, and only after they left Tobago, that result would have been confirmed. But what I wanted to know is, what is the particular guidance in light of COVID-19 and these children at this time, inclusive of a baby, on the compound of the Defense Force? And my second question, I know that the Minister of National Security is not there, but we have been getting a lot of calls from American citizens who have informed us when they visit Caribbean Airlines, they are being turned away from being able to purchase tickets to leave the country. Information reaching us is that the Minister of National Security stated that as American citizens, it's not necessary or mandatory that they should receive an exemption to leave the country. And when other checks were made to the American embassy, they were also told that it's not necessary to get an exemption. I don't know if this could also be cleared up. Thank you.
Okay, so I believe both matters are for the Ministry of National Security, and we will ensure that those questions get transferred to that ministry so that you can get an answer to your questions. Okay.
Thank you. And we go to AZP News, please. Yes, I think Mr.
Hello,
Harry.
Yeah.
Great.
Yep.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning, Prabhi Harry, AZP News. I just wanted to go back to the issues where you say that the majority of people who have passed on had either diabetes or hypertension. Can you explain why is that so? Is it because that is highly prevalent in the population, or is it that it makes them more susceptible to COVID-19? And my second question has to do with the majority of cases in County Caroni, and the same issue arises where you find there is a large number of people who have diabetes and hypertension. Is it that makes them more susceptible to contracting the COVID-19, or is it something else? I just wanted that fleshed out a bit. Thank you.
Okay. So in terms of your questions, basically diabetes is a condition that will result in an immunocompromised state, meaning that your immune system is not able to cope as well with viruses and other pathogens, example bacteria. So the healing is not as good as someone without diabetes, especially uncontrolled diabetes. So we find, as you related to Caroni, so the percentage, as I put up before, for comorbidities in the home isolated patients in Caroni, we saw 83.9% of them having no comorbidities whatsoever. 16.1% would have had some comorbidities of one type or the other. So I don't think, of course, you had said that, of course, we have a high level of diabetes and hypertension in the country. So if you have that pool available to be infected, they will be infected like any other category of individual. But from the statistics for Caroni, clearly, those without comorbidities clearly outweigh those with comorbidities. But the ones with the comorbidities, diabetes, hypertension, asthma, tend to have poorer clinical outcomes than those without any comorbidities. And of course, internationally, we have seen that trend as well. And of course, age is associated with poor outcomes. As the older you get, the outcome is usually more severe as you go, especially above 60. And we have found that in Trinidad as well. So, Mr. Bihari, hope that answers your question.
Thank you, CMO. And now, Express newspaper, please. I believe we have a question from Express.
Good morning, Camille Hunt, Express. Dr. Parasram, there's a bit of a debate going on over whether or not COVID-19 is airborne. The CDC updated its guidelines on Monday stating that it is, but now they've reversed that position. And that reversal is being criticized by a number of experts who are insisting that the virus is indeed airborne. So can you weigh in on this? Also, the Surfing Association is calling for beaches to be reopened for water sports, and they are saying that surfing poses no additional risk. They've also submitted a proposal on how they believe the reopening of beaches could be safely done. So has the ministry received this proposal, and is the reopening of beaches for water sports being considered?
Okay, so in terms of your first question, in terms of aerosolization, we have to bear in mind that this is a brand new virus. So scientific research will continue to be new. It is less than a year old. So we have certain conditions that we know for a fact create aerosolization of this virus. For example, intubation is one such technique that is used when patients are severely ill. During those, there's aerosolization of the virus in that particular procedure. When persons have ventilation, receive, for example, asthma, and they have their nebulization, those procedures also create aerosolization, where you have very small particles of the virus being able to be suspended in air for a long period of time. The mode of transmission generally that we find is in the research is suggested to be in great part responsible for the propagation of this virus, and of course is respiratory droplet infection, which we know for a fact is one of the mechanisms of transport. But as the research keeps going, there will always be debate as to whether it is aerosolized or not, and that is not conclusive at this time to make a definitive statement about it. But we know for a fact, as I said, for certain procedures it is aerosolized, but for the most part we are dealing with respiratory transmission by droplet. In terms of your second question, I believe the ministry has received through the Office of the Minister that exemption request. So any exemption is approved by the Honourable Minister. He has the right to have an exemption to any regulation that is put out, and that is being given due consideration through his office.
Thank you very much. And now we go to 91.9, please.
doctors on the panel. Yes, good morning to the doctors on the panel. Just a quick question, especially for the epidemiology specialists. In terms of the contact tracing, we've seen some issues with respect to truth and different things. What I want to find out is if the contact tracing itself has at all been used to effectively stop the spread of virus in any particular case. Have you been able to identify communities, and is it working, or is the contact tracing as it is now strictly for statistical purposes? And as medical professionals, we've seen other viruses come into the world community and remain with us for a long period of time. Can you all at this point point to what would happen should COVID-19 continue? Does it mean that mask wearing may become a way of life forever? Those are my two. Thanks.
Okay, for the first one.
Yeah, so we move to Dr. Hines to respond to the first question, please.
Okay, thank you for the question. It's actually a very good one. It's a good opportunity to emphasize or re-emphasize the importance of contact tracing. As you very rightly pointed out, what we do in contact tracing does aid in the identification of potential chains of transmission and in cutting those chains off. So when we identify that a group of individuals has been exposed to a confirmed case, we have the opportunity to restrict the movement of those individuals and restrict the opportunity for those individuals to interact with others while they may be incubating virus and while they may be at the point where they may become infectious. So contact tracing remains a key tool in reducing the risk of spread and mitigating the risk of spread from the known cases, and for that reason it is still actively done. It is not just for statistical purposes. So thank you for the opportunity to explain that in further detail. I'd like to tackle a bit of the second question as well, noting that, as you've again rightly pointed out, other viruses, respiratory viruses in particular, have entered the human population historically, and they remain in circulation. As they remain in circulation and the human population becomes a little more, for want of a better word, adapted to them, the extent to which they cause severe illness eventually begins to wane. We are very early in the introduction of this particular virus, and we will be guided by the clinical outcomes and the epidemiological patterns as to whether we need to take different measures, sustain the existing measures, or change things altogether. So that will only be determined with new information coming in, but we continue to gather this data so that we can inform our decisions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hines. And we go into some follow-up questions. I have a question here from Mr. Cummings at I-95. He's asked, what are considered normal pulse oximeter readings for a child on adolescent? And this question is for Dr. Fraser.
Okay. Thank you for your question. Those same readings apply in children. And let me repeat what those readings are. For the adult, we did say 95% and above, and we expect your pulse to be between 60 and 100. However, in children, the pulse rate that's accepted, the range is a little wider. Sometimes it can go as much as 100 and 110, and that is also acceptable. And the pulse oximeter reading sometimes changes a little bit as well. And so generally with children, we accept 95% and above. Anytime you have a child and you notice it's lower than that, you can still please make contact with the health professionals. The only difference really is with the pulse, and the pulse can be a little faster in children, and that is also acceptable.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fraser. And we're thankful for technology. We have Newsday's questions here sent to me. This is for CMO. A study from the University of Miami suggested that former COVID-19 patients suffered tissue damage due to the effects on the heart. The question is, if among any of the local cases of COVID-19 patients where patients have recovered, have any patients had lingering health conditions?
Okay, so the short, Dr. Fraser might be in a better position to give you what he has noted in terms of follow-up at the community level, but we have seen certain individuals take an extremely long time to actually get back to normal function, especially in terms of their respiratory function. So there's been a lot of fatigue post-infection with the severely ill individuals, So there has been some persistent illness lasting weeks. I wouldn't say months, but at least weeks in terms of the recovery post-COVID. There has been noted thromboembolic phenomena occurring, cerebrovascular accidents, which we know as strokes, as well as myocardial infarctions occurring in our population as well. We have noted some children having the MIS-C, which is a basically inflammatory system response in children that we have seen. We have noted that in our population as well. So they have been seen, but I don't know if Dr. Fraser wants to add anything with his follow-up at the county level.
Yes, I do agree with the CMO. We have noticed that some patients do take a longer time to fully recover. And in particular, we've noticed a lot of people complaining of the loss of taste and smell, and that those tend to take a longer time to come back to normal. And some of the other things people complain of is the consistent pain and body pains as well. And fatigue is a big one. I agree. We've had, I think, the longest we've noticed so far in the community, we've had people at least home for a month dealing with the symptoms of COVID-19. And we know that internationally that there are a number of people who go on for months to have recurring kind of chronic symptoms. And as we've been saying all along, it's very early in the process. COVID-19 is less than a year. So it's very difficult to say exactly how long symptoms will persist. But we are noticing that people's symptoms are lingering around for a little while longer than everyone would like.
Okay, great. Thank you. We thank Mr. Superville from Newsday for sending in his question. And the question before that was actually from Mr. Turner from I-95.5. And we go back to Mr. Richard Khan of CNC3 of Guardian Media Limited.
All right, good morning again, panel. So my question is to CMO and Dr. Avery Hines. Okay. The flu season is almost upon us. Sure. And so Dr. Hines, in your experience, and with taking into account our current fight against COVID-19, what do you predict that season would look like? Would we be seeing more deaths? Would we be seeing people or less cases of the virus because of the public health measures we have implemented? And for the aspect of that too, Dr. Parasram, is how is this going to impact certain policies, such as how many vaccines are we going to be bringing? Are we going to be bringing in more to prevent any further outbreaks, or are we going to bring in a little bit less because we anticipate that we may not have as much cases due to the public health measures?
Okay. So let me take your second part first. So in terms of the vaccine, we have ordered 200,000 vaccines, influenza vaccines for this flu season, which runs usually from October all the way to May. So we have the first 100,000 in the country, came in yesterday. That would be to C40, hopefully, which is our central stores later on today, and then distributed to the health centers, both in Trinidad and Tobago, over the weekend into the early part of next week. We will be launching our campaign early next week as well in terms of influenza. As we look at the numbers of influenza over the last few years, what we never had in place before is we never had this sort of decreased movement in terms of our public health measures. So we expect, based on the measures that we have in place, and what we are trying is a very similar virus to COVID-19 in the way it is spread. So we expect that the measures we have in place will have a similar effect on the number of cases of influenza, added to which is a vaccine-preventable disease. So we're trying to front-load our vaccine season in the sense that we're trying to get a lot of vaccines out to the population early on in the season, October, November, December, so that we have people vaccinated earlier, decreasing the susceptible load in the population. So that, coupled with the public health measures that we have in place, the expectation is that we will have less cases than we would have had last year. However, we don't know what effect COVID-19 would have together with the influenza. That is something that we would not have seen in the world so far. So whether there would be exacerbation of symptoms, we see some research that has pointed out that persons can be infected with both at the same time. So we're asking people, especially in the high-risk groups, to have your vaccine early, as soon as we get them out there, that you have your vaccination done to prevent having both infections, of course, and the likelihood of a poor outcome becomes even greater. So again, we have to wait and see how they coexist in terms of both viruses in our population, which hasn't been seen before. but we are hoping that we will see some sort of reduction if the vaccine program goes well and if the public health measures are sustained, especially the mandatory mask wearing.
Okay, thank you very much, CMO. And just a reminder, as we go back to our representatives from the media, we're asking for one brief question, please. We go now to TV6.
Good morning again. My question this time is to Dr. Parasram. What I wanted to know is, I know you spoke of an exemption with respect to beaches reaching the Ministry of National Security or the Ministry of Health. I wanted to know if you received or you are aware of any exemption requests received from gym operators and also cinemas in light of social media distancing that can be experienced at these particular areas.
Okay. Right, so anyone who wishes an exemption to the public health regulations, the only person that can grant that exemption is the Honorable Minister of Health. So it's free to send in a query or a letter asking for an exemption from a particular area to the Ministry of Health, so that the minister can look at it and make a decision on a case-to-case basis. We have received some exemptions that I know of for persons operating individual gyms that is being given the attention of the Honorable Minister. So I have noted that in addition to having the exemption request from the surfing individuals, but all the exemptions don't come through my office. However, I have noted both of them, both for the gyms and the surfing, coming into the Ministry of Health.
Okay, thank you, CMO. And now AZP News, please. One brief question.
Hi, good morning again. I just wanted to speak to Dr. Hines about the new cases that we are seeing on the eastern part of the country. Has the contact tracing been done for that? And can you tell us why you think we have now having these cases in rural roads and things at the eastern part of the country? Thank you.
Thank you. We go to Dr. Hines for a response.
Okay, thank you for the question. Yes, for certain, the contact tracing for any new case is carried out in a rigorous and in an immediate fashion. So contact tracing would be done for each of the cases as they have been identified. And we do know that the CMOH for both of those counties are actively pursuing that activity. Now, again, it is just a matter of introduction of individuals who are infectious into new populations where people are susceptible. And while we can't say why there is this shift in pattern, so to speak, what we can suggest to mitigate that is that wherever the opportunities arise for enhancing the adherence to the regulations, the adherence to the recommendations, the adherence to the mitigation strategies for prevention of spread of COVID-19, that those are very rigorously adhered to. We want to make sure that people do remember in all places, whether you thought you were at risk before or not, we do want to encourage everyone to do the hand washing, to do the physical distancing, to reduce the gathering, to do the mask wearing, to not go into places, whether it's at work or other gatherings, when ill. We just want to encourage everyone, everywhere across the entire country, to stick to those recommendations as seriously as possible, as rigorously as possible, and we hope that that will help to reduce spread in any community.
Thank you, Dr. Hines. And now a repeat question from 91.9, please.
Yes, hello, good morning. We're next to again here from 91.9, thank you. Just a final question. It could be referred to as immunity in the community, and maybe the medical professionals could advise based on historical data or what other coronaviruses have done. Can we expect that as more people contract the coronavirus, that their immunity would take us to a point where they'll be less susceptible or be better able to fight it off? Have we seen that as a trend? Do you think that's what will happen with coronavirus moving forward, this particular strain? Thank you.
Okay, so again, I think it's too early in the epidemic to tell. We have different examples over time. We have the influenza, which changes in terms of the mutation from season to season. So we would have the need for vaccination, so there's no long-lasting immunity to one particular strain. As an example, we have things like yellow fever. Once you have vaccination for it, you have vaccination for life, so there's no significant change. We don't know how COVID-19 is going to behave, in which line it's going to take. Other coronaviruses exist where you find that the disease is milder and has been with us for many, many years, many, many seasons. So again, we have to wait and see how it pans out in the term of time. But basically, we are learning as we go, and there are some evidence that suggests that persons may be reinfected with COVID-19 in other parts of the world. Research has been coming forward. So again, it's too new, it's too early to tell and to make projections of that nature.
Thank you, CMO. And a final quick question from Guardian Media Limited.
All right, thank you again. Okay, so CMO, just to follow up on your response, right? With the flu season coming, we would anticipate that more people will come down with flu-like symptoms. So I know the ministry has put in place some mechanisms to ensure that we don't end up with a backlog of tests again, but is anything going to be done to expand on this for the flu season, or do you think that what we have right now should suffice?
Right. So basically, what we're seeing at this point in time is anywhere between 600 to 700 samples being taken in one given day in the country. We have a capacity at our labs of anywhere between 1,200 and 1,300 tests that we can do in a day as well. So we have some excess capacity by way of testing. So we hope that should be sufficient for now. If, of course, need be, you remember, Minister would have said that we are in the process of purchasing rapid Pcr kits, which are in number close to 200,000 when we add both the P-type and the F-type together. So that will give us an additional resource of 200,000 tests that can be used in short order once they come in. So that will boost our system to be able to test. So based on those figures, of course, everything is subject to change. We have to see how the influenza behaves as it interacts with COVID-19. And then we will, of course, adjust our mechanism of testing if need be.
Thank you very much, CMO. And we have come to the end of this morning's conference. Everyone be safe and remember to wear your mask.